hope you had a fun time answering that question. As I was thinking about that question for myself this week, so many times when you think about that question, you think about what am I doing of who am I or what am I becoming? And they're two different questions. There's certainly a Venn diagram that goes over both. When I think about my life's work, something that I'm passionate about is really saving Christians from Christianity. Amen. Thank you for that. Yeah. Amen. And really for me, it was a journey my whole life where when I was a kid, I would hear all of these people who talked about Jesus, and they talked about salvation, and they talked about good news, and everything that they said sounded really bad. Or there was all of these people who would invite me to church, and they were the ones going to heaven. I'm like, I have to spend an eternity with you? I have some serious questions about this thing. And so as I got older, I began to notice, I lived in this kind of middle-class neighborhood where people had like a nice house and a nice car. We went to like a nice church, but there was always this feeling that something underneath, that people were just discontent. Then I remember going to college, and I remember doing a biblical studies degree in liberal arts where you begin to ask all of these different questions and think about the Bible and faith in a different way. And I saw all of my other friends who wanted to become pastors slowly ask questions and think, oh man, they lied to us, right? This isn't real, lose their faith. And really for the first time in my life, I was like, man, this thing is more interesting than ever. Why aren't we talking about this? Do we know how big our tradition is? Do we know how diverse our tradition is? How can we made this story so small and so transactional and so myopic and so limited and so anemic? There's a Jesus story out there that is so big and so beautiful and so universal. It speaks to the transformation of humanity. It speaks to our healing, and at its core, it talks about our identity. Why don't we talk more about that? And I feel like I've spent my life trying to do that, trying to create spaces and conversations where we can understand our identity in the deepest and most profound ways. That church shouldn't be a place where you go and you learn more Bible verses and you memorize them, but you stay an asshole. Period, exclamation mark, whatever you want on the end of that statement. Church should be a place where your identity comes alive. You fully discover who you are, not where you hide any parts of yourself, where you can be seen and known in your flaws and you're figuring it out, in your doubts, in your discovery, in your evolution. It should be a place that when teenagers go through what teenagers go through, they're not scared to ask questions, but they're like, man, I'm surrounded by all of these adults who welcome it because they've gone through their healing and through their transformation. They're not scared for me to ask this. In fact, they have experience for me to thrive. So instead of me living in secret, living in guilt, or living in shame, I get to become fully human, and I get to see that God is there with me the whole time. I think the thing has potential for magic, and I see that magic in Jesus all the time. And so today I want to talk about identity, and I want to talk about this idea that God is so deeply interested in our identity. That when we see the stories of Jesus, what you'll begin to notice as we go through the Gospel of Mark, we're finishing Mark chapter 3 today. We've got a lot of chapters to go. We make a joke about that every week. But what you're going to begin to see is how little Jesus talks about you going to heaven one day. And by how little, I mean never. Which is interesting. That wasn't his point. How interested Jesus is in this kingdom and this reality now, and this journey that you're on now, and who you're becoming now, that Jesus is obsessed with that. And how did we miss that in our American consumerized version of evangelicalism or conservative Christianity? How did we miss Jesus' story and invitation into transformation? Instead, we became obsessed about telling people that they were sinners and converting them instead of inviting them to a life of healing and changing the world. And I think Jesus invites us into a deeper and greater identity, and to talk about that, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about a universal spiritual path, which makes some people scared. Other people say hooray, but wherever you're at, we're going to talk about it. If we can talk about that, then we can talk about Rabbi Akiva. Some of you know my Rabbi Akiva story. Some of you don't, but man, it's one of my favorites. If we can talk about Rabbi Akiva, then we can start to ask some questions of who have I been? And if we can talk about who have I been, then you know a 1990s movie, The Fifth Element, my friends. There you go. 7 of you are going to be excited about this. And about 50 of you weren't even born yet. Fantastic. If we can talk about that, then I can talk about who am I being. And if we can talk about that, then we can transcend and include. And if we can transcend and include, then we can end with who am I becoming. Follow along with me in Mark chapter 3. Then Jesus entered a house. The then is that Jesus was just healing a bunch of people because that's what Jesus does all throughout the Gospels. I want to remind you that again and again and again so that you know who Jesus is. Anytime that you hear people talk about a scary, angry, judgmental God, you won't see it in Jesus. All you'll see in Jesus is somebody who everywhere he goes, he just heals people. And then after healing people, he goes up onto a mountain. He says, some of you are already my followers, but I want you to be my apostles because I want to invite you into this thing. It's going to be some hard work, but if you want to heal the world, then you got to go on your own transformation path as well. And this is the path that is narrow, right? Because it's hard to do the work. That's not a story about you going to hell one day. That's saying doing the real work in the world is just going to cost you something as you find your true identity. So Jesus invites you into that, and then once again, Jesus enters the house. And again, a crowd gathered. And of course a crowd gathered, because everywhere Jesus went, he left people better than he found them. So people wanted to be where Jesus was at. He didn't have to convince them or tell them. They just wanted that. And so as Jesus followers, we always get to ask ourselves the question, do people want that in me? Not because I'm trying to convert them to Christianity, but everywhere I go, do I leave people better than I found them? So that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. It was packed. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. It's a huge plot twist, by the way. Jesus is like doing the work. He's out there, his family hears about it, and he says, what is this crazy guy doing? It's already a question of identity. So much of our first part of our journey is working through the identity of the families that we came from, or the systems that we came from, to who we're becoming. And the universal Jesus path is it's a human story. So often when we talked about Christianity, we made it a religious story. This story is just for us. We're the ones who have the answer. We're the ones who are in the club. And we've missed it. Nothing about the Jesus story is that. It's a universal human story. If it's true of Jesus, it's true of you. If it's true of Jesus, it's true of God. That's what Jesus comes to show you. This is the best of who God is, and this is the best of what your human journey can look like. You're going to go through a season where you're going to begin to question your identity, and universally, we're all going to have those moments where we become something else that our family never thought of, or we begin to differentiate. We become adults, we grow, we individuate. Psychology has given us answers for that, and it's been in this universal Jesus story the entire time. And the teachers of the law came down from Jerusalem. He is possessed by Beelzebub, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons. What a weird story again. It starts off with Jesus and his buddies are healing people, and crowds are gathering because of it, and his family and the religious institutions of the day come and question his identity. And when I think about this story, I think so much about you all at New Abbey, so much about my own story. Hasn't that been true of us? That so much of our story of transformation and our identity has also been one of rediscovering who we are outside of the systems of faith that we came from. Beyond maybe the family of origins that we once knew. Places and people and organizations that told us that we weren't enough, that you're not okay. You can't ask those things. You couldn't be both this and that. And yet Jesus even goes through this story. When you're looking for comfort and identity of figuring out who you've been and where you're going, would you trust that Jesus has been there as well? Jesus goes on. So Jesus called them over to him, and he began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end is come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house. Truly, I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin. I used to go to like a really crazy charismatic church with my aunt when I was little. It's not the church like I grew up in, but whenever I would go with Aunt Judy, we know that we're going to see some crazy shit in her church, right? What I loved about my Aunt Judy's church is that they were the only people going to heaven. Like, good for them. Those 200 people saved, 8 billion other people, real screwed. So they were having a good time. But I remember like passages like this coming up, and you're spending your whole time saying like, did we do the unforgivable sin? Have we maybe said, and just people are stressed all of the time. And I don't know if you grew up in environments like that, where you got like lost in the weeds and weird verses like this. So let me just free you real quick. This Jesus story is a Jesus story for the early church. Early church is all Jewish, by the way, because Jesus was Jewish, and they are now having a new understanding about their faith. They are forming a new identity. They are transforming from where they have been to a new form. They have a new understanding about who God is and a new understanding about what it means to be human in the world. They see that their story over here has good in it. It shows them how to be a people of God. And now this Jesus story takes it out from being a people of God to saying this story is a universal story for all people to be a people of God. And so these early Jews still had an identity crisis. I don't know if you've ever gone through a season of transformation. You don't just like wake up one day and you're fully formed. There's a lot of insecurities along the way. Did you ever come back from college and you had read like 3 books and you were so much smarter than your parents? And you're like beginning to like talk to them about some things, right? And it's scary. You ever go home 20 years after the fact and you revert to the same 17-year-old you were before? You're not that person anywhere else. You did 3 different therapy sessions before you went back home, but you stepped foot in that door and you're like, God, who am I today? Because transformation is hard and identity is hard. And the early church knew that. They were leaving something that was important to them. It's what they knew over here. And so all this is a story for the early church saying, whenever people tell you that your light is darkness, don't worry about it. That's it. For all my brothers and sisters in this room, for so many of you in the queer community, if anyone ever tells you that your light is darkness, don't worry about it. Jesus is saying a house cannot be divided against itself. Jesus is saying the Spirit of God is in you, and anybody who speaks out against that, it's not real. That's what this story is trying to say. It's trying to affirm the work of God that is already in you. It's trying to affirm the Spirit that is already in you. And it's doing it in a little bit of an extreme way, because sometimes when you're in your process of transformation, you have a few seasons there where you're a little bit extreme on some of the things that you say, and that's kind of what's going on. He said this because they were saying he had an impure spirit, so that's the early church saying, oh, if anyone ever says, like, there's something wrong with us, we know better, because Jesus gave us permission in that. Then Jesus' mothers and brothers arrived, standing outside. They sent someone in to call him, and a crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother, and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and my sister and my mother. Jesus is always inviting us into a new path of understanding our identity. This is not a story of saying like, screw your family. That's not it. It's a story of saying your identity may outgrow some things sometimes. And when it outgrows some things, it gives you permission to step into that invitation that maybe God has more for you than previously in that version of your life. Many of you know this. Sometimes in your life, you discover family. There are friends who now take on mother, brother, sister, father for you in a different way. Sometimes you had a really wonderful, healthy family that you grew up in and that you lived in, and you still discover family somewhere else. For some of you, it was painful, and it was abusive, and it was difficult, and you don't have family over here, and you discover family somewhere else. And for the early church, this was their calling card. They had these communities of love where anybody could come to these dinners that they would have. They would call it love feasts. And in these love feasts, everyone would come to a table. Not an orgy, by the way, in case some of you are wondering what's going on there. Some of you are like, but I would also want to go to that party. No, they would have dinner together, and everyone was equal. That was what was revolutionary. That's what made them family, because in that world, not everyone was equal. There was all kinds of different levels and stages, but in that room, you were all mother and brother and sister and father. And that was revolutionary to the identity of Jesus' people. It's what we try to do in this room. It's why we start with the unity prayer every single Sunday as a tuning fork of who we are, to remind ourselves of a greater truth about what it means to be human and who God is. Rabbi Akiva was this rabbi who lived in the 1st century, and one day the rabbis tell a story that Rabbi Akiva was walking in the fog. And Rabbi Akiva gets to a Roman barracks, and when Rabbi Akiva gets there, the guards at the barracks shout out to him, "Who are you and where are you going?" Rabbi Akiva says to them, ask me that question again. They said, who are you and where are you going? And Rabbi Akiva said, I will pay you twice as much money if you come to my home every day and ask me the same questions. That the journey of transformation and the journey of identity is that, of who are you and where are you going? Jesus is always inviting us into that deeper story, into those deeper questions of who are we and where are we going? And Jesus never shies away from talking about the most difficult places that have formed us and named us and identified us before. And Jesus offers us and invites us into new places to find new identity. As we find our new identity, or as we evolve, or as we grow, the first question I ask myself that we should ask ourselves is, who have I been? You were given a part to play. You were born into a certain family. You were a certain sibling, first, second, third, fourth, whatever it may be. You were born in a certain region of the world. I have no doubt in my mind that if I was born in Saudi Arabia, I would be Muslim. I have no doubt, right? There's all these different things. It's just probably what you are. It's how you understand the world. And one of the things that we get to do is that we get to have rigorous honesty with ourselves, and we get to ask ourselves questions of, who have I been? What are the narratives and voices that I have been given that have shaped who I am? That's what Jesus is doing in this story. It was the religious institutions, it was the families that gave him the narrative of who he was. And as you do that rigorous honesty, as you ask yourselves that questions, one of the joys that you get in life is to say, do those narratives work for me? They might not. And the freedom of Jesus is that you get to be whoever you want. That's the gift of it. Nobody gets to limit who you get to be. You can be formed into something different and beautiful. By the way, that doesn't mean there's not ethics. That doesn't mean there's not ways to grow. That doesn't mean there's not maturity. It's an invitation into healthier transformation. And what Jesus is inviting us into are these questions of, who have I been? I have like silly stories in my head as a kid. I remember going to my grandma's house all the time, and I would always eat like 15 pancakes. And then I just came to a day one day, I'm like, why am I eating 15 pancakes? Because somewhere as a 7-year-old, my grandma told me, isn't it so amazing how many pancakes you eat? And then one day as a teenager, I'm like, I want to vomit every time I'm at grandma's house. This is so dumb. But you just did it because that's who you were. You were the kid who just ate a ton of pancakes. Some of you you were the people pleaser. Everyone loves you because you didn't ask questions. You were the challenger. Everyone knew you were the one that was going to push them. You were this, you were that. And then you got away one day and you came back and you said, that's not who I am. That's just the part that I've been playing. I am so much more than this. And Jesus invites you to free yourself from any of those narratives. Again, I'll say it over and over and over in a community like this where people told so many of you that you could not be gay and you could not be Christian, that it was an impossibility, how that has shaped so many of your identities, how that has scarred your formation. But that you get to be here today, that you get to look around you, that you are surrounded by people who know your true identity, who know their true identity. You are modeling for children upstairs so much more of what humanity could be. My son comes home the other day, and he's telling me the age-old story of the 5th grade playground. A girl is taking his hat and running away with it. We all know what that means, because we've all been in 5th grade. And so I said, sometimes people do that because they're flirting with you or they like you. And he begins to cry, don't you ever say that to me. I don't like when you say that to me. I'm like, okay, whoa. I didn't mean to push any buttons here, And he says, I just don't like it. I don't like anybody. I just like baseball. I'm like, okay, that's great. It's not challenge you. But thanks to you, New Abbey, said this. I don't want a girlfriend or I don't want a boyfriend right now. I just don't like anybody. That's just normal. That's wild. And you should take that in. Because almost none of us grew up in that household or in that community or in that school. Who have we been is something that we all get to answer for ourselves. And the beauty of this community is that we are transforming and that we are growing and we are evolving. We're telling a bigger story. And kids now don't get to unlearn the same things that we had to unlearn. Because sometimes the process and the story of transformation is more about unlearning than it is learning. And you all are giving a gift to one another and to the next generation that they have less to unlearn about Jesus. And we'll probably all screw them up in other special ways. But that's to come, and we don't know that yet. So we'll get there. If we can move from who have I been and ask the rigorous questions about every aspect of our life and the stories that we've been given and the voices that we were told and the narratives that we hold. One of the questions I always ask in there is, who are the voices that are shaping me? And when I ask that question for the first time, it's really, what those voices? Who are the voices that are shaping me? Are they limited voices? Are they good voices? Are they helpful voices? Are they just voices for a season? But there are voices out there that are shaping you. Jesus knows it in this story. It was his family, it was the religious institutions. Who are the voices that are shaping you? And you get to go through every aspect of your life, of who you become and what you're doing, and you get to say, are there still voices there that are limiting me, or are there voices there that are helpful for me? And then after you've asked that question, or who are the voices that are shaping me, then I ask myself the question is, who are you being actively in this moment? Who are you being now? What I love about Jesus is it starts at the beginning of the story. Jesus is being one who heals people wherever he goes. What if you can never tell people what you do? What if the only way they could understand you is by experiencing you? I think they would all know who Jesus is. The experience of it, the magic of it, the healing of it. We had a little new Abbey youth group moment the other day, and it's super cute. There's only like 8 kids right now, and they're all gathering together, and we're having a conversation. And one of the things that comes up is we were talking about who are the people that bring love in your life. And one of the kids asked me that question, and I named my wife, and immediately all of the kids in the room said, "Oh, Carissa, we love her hugs. We love the way that she loves us." They weren't asking the question of, does she run a Fortune 500 company? What kind of degree did she have? Tell me how many Oscars. No. The whole world knows who she is because they understand her just by experiencing her. Light Mother's Day brag, I love you. But it's true. And I know so many of you in the room, it's the same. I think we have to ask ourselves, who are we being in this world? How are people experiencing us and who we are? Fifth Element is one of those like wild, sci-fi movies of the 1990s. Anyone remember that movie? Anyone seen it? Right? You know, like the character, and she's got like the red hair, and she wears like the strap things. You know what I'm talking about? Everyone knows that scene, right? Yeah. Come on. If you don't know the scene, Google it later. For all my millennials, welcome. For all my Gen Zs, opportunity is all I'm saying. Opportunity ahead for you. And I'm at a taco cart because it's Los Angeles, and that's what we do because we have the best tacos in the world. Praise Jesus, amen. And I'm in a tuxedo because it's Los Angeles, and I was hungry after a party, and I wanted some tacos. And I'm standing in line, and the woman in front of me is wearing the Fifth Element fit. It's not Halloween. It's not anything. She's just wearing it. And what I love is that I didn't even blink. I stood in line with her for like 10 minutes until I realized, she's wearing the Fifth Element outfit. But then again, I'm wearing a tuxedo. How amazing is this? And no one questioned us. Because I promise you, if we were standing in line in Omaha right now, people would have some questions. They'd say, what are you two doing? We're getting tacos. What are you doing? Not in Los Angeles, my friends. You can just show up anywhere, however, and we're like, cool. I love it. I don't think the people are here today, but I remember one person at Christmas this last year showed up in a Playboy bunny thing. And I remember her saying, I didn't know if I could come to church for Christmas Eve service because I'm in this Playboy bunny thing. And I was like, oddly enough, I didn't notice because I didn't. And I just love that we all can become whatever we want to become. We all can choose whatever identity we want to choose. And sometimes it's scary to choose that identity. One more clothing story. I have this astronaut costume. Sometimes I wear it for VBS, and if I have a few margaritas, sometimes I'll wear it to go dancing. It's a weird thing. But there's something about that astronaut costume that I feel so comfortable in. It's like this onesie, and I'm not joking you. I've had so many debates, so many Sundays, including this morning, of I'm wearing that thing to church because I feel fully alive in that thing. And I never do it because I feel so insecure, and I feel like I'm going to look stupid. And so I wear what I always wear, my dad outfit. Elevated dad bod, that's all that I'm going for, and I'm living into it fully. Thank you. Thank you for one clap for that. I appreciate that. Some of you are like, it's not that elevated, and dad bod questionable. Anyway, it's rude, but we're back. You can be whoever you want to be. Sometimes it's scary to make that choice. Sometimes it's scary to just put on a new outfit, let alone to change the whole interior of who you are. But some of you are sitting there and say, oh, there's a whole other part of me that wants to come out. There's a whole other part of me that wants to shine, and I'm terrified to show it to the world. When you see a Jesus story like this today, I hope that you see a story where Jesus says, challenge those voices. Challenge all of the voices that are shaping who you are. Challenge them, let them go if need be, move on, and then find other voices who shape who you are. And the who is important in that. Surround yourself with people who speak to who you are, who affirm who you are, who celebrate the goodness of who you are. That's the beauty of being in a community like this and being in a diverse place like Los Angeles. That's the gift of this world. What I love about the Christian story, about the Judeo-Christian story, about this big Christian tradition that we come from is all the things that I wasn't taught as a kid. The story goes like this. There was a bunch of slaves in Egypt, and there was a Pharaoh, and that was the story. And then God came along and told them they weren't going to be slaves anymore. That is called a story of salvation. That's called a story of freedom. That's what that story is. That is the pinnacle story for all of us. And then Jesus comes along and says, what if things don't have to oppress you anymore? What if it doesn't have to be family systems, religious systems, empire systems? What if it doesn't have to be the demons, the whatever? We can talk about all the different things. What if that doesn't have to be your identity anymore, is what Jesus invites us into. Because I think Jesus realizes, because Jesus never talks about, literally never in the Gospel of Mark, are you going to heaven and afterlife? I'm not saying that the Bible doesn't talk about it in other places. It's just a rare thing. Jesus is just so much more interested in your healing and your transformation now, that you would discover your identity now, because this is your life. And when you're thriving, then you'll go out there and you'll make other disciples, and you'll make those people thrive as well. That's all that Jesus is doing. When Jesus talks about sin, he's just doing something simple. He's saying, hurt people, hurt people. If you've been to New Abbey for a long time, you know that's what we're talking about. That's the story. When you're hurting, you hurt other people. It's not crazy. Come along for this journey, be a part of this invitation, discover your new identity, and you'll no longer be one of those hurt people who hurt people. Instead, you'll be one of those transformed people who transform people. That's who you get to be. When you understand your identity, then other people around you, their identities shine. That's the work that we get to do here, people. That's the gift of this place. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for being bold enough. Thank you for all of the times, for all of the people here who said, I don't think I can ever go back to church again, and you came. And you shared your story, and you shared your truth, and you shared your beautiful diversity, and you gave hope to somebody else. That is the good news that we do together. Those are the identities that we're forming with one another. Thank you for being here, New Abbey. Would you find those same 3 or 4 or 17 people around you and answer this question: who am I becoming? Enjoy.